About a year ago, I drug my kid around to various grocery stores to look for vanilla beans. And I finally found them. I brought them home and I put them into a bottle of vodka because I had always wanted to make vanilla extract and never had. And I remember my kid asking, "What are you making?" And I said, "Vanilla extract." And he said, genuinely confused, "But we can just buy that." And he wasn't wrong. We absolutely can. And it's not very costly. And mine probably won't even be ready for several more months. I didn't have a great answer for him in the moment. I've kind of laughed it off. But it stayed with me, that question of why are you making something you could just buy? And underneath it, there was a question I didn't say out loud. Why does it feel so hard to justify that to myself? Why isn't it okay to just do things because I want to? Welcome to Learn, Talk, Do. I'm Heidi. This is an inclusive devotional for families. Each week, we take one idea and explore it through research, science, and wisdom from cultures around the world. Then we figure out how to talk about it with our kids and actually do something with it. This week, we're talking about play, specifically what happens when we forget how. So here's the thing about that moment in my kitchen. I am not a person who does things without a reason. I am deeply task-oriented. And I always have a to-do list. I have multiple to-do lists. In fact, I manage my time carefully because I have a lot of things going on. I work full-time, I homeschool, I podcast, I've got side hustles, I've got my family, and I have learned to be very efficient, and I take a lot of pride and joy in being efficient. But I've also learned to be useful and productive. So when I had this idea to just start making vanilla extract, it kind of surprised me that I liked it and that it was okay to just do because I enjoyed it, not necessarily just for what it would produce. It's not like homemade extract is cheaper or better or more impressive than a store-bought bottle, although I will say I do think it is better. I suppose it does taste a little bit better. I like shaking the jar. I like watching the color deepen. I like that it was slow and purposelessness and completely mine. And I also noticed with some discomfort that I keep looking for ways to justify it. Oh, I'm going to give some vanilla extract away as gifts, or I could sell it. And those are things that I do. I definitely give it away as gifts. I have lots of vanilla extract at this point, so I probably should sell it. It's a cottage food thing. It can be useful. But the truth is, whether I do those things or not, I had to learn to make peace with something, which is that I had to understand that it's okay to do things with no real point. And that really was a lot harder than it sounds. I think a lot of us might be like this, and talking to other moms as we talk about our kids and whether or not we're one of those moms that likes to play, I've never been a good player. And I think my kids are watching me kind of be serious, and then they're taking on that seriousness for themselves. And so it's something that I've been thinking about for myself is, well, how do I do things that are just fun, that are just playful, that are just enjoyable to do, and therefore I do them just for that reason? There's a concept in developmental psychology called free play, and researchers have been sounding the alarm about it for decades. Not because kids don't know how to play, but because we're quietly engineering the play part right out of childhood. Kids today have way more scheduled activities, more structured learning time, more screens with those automatic built-in feedback loops, and they have significantly less unstructured time than kids had, 30 years ago when I was a kid. But what's interesting, and what I didn't expect when I went looking into this kind of research, is that the research on play isn't really about kids, or rather, it's not only about kids. Dr. Stuart Brown, a psychiatrist who spent decades studying play, found that play is a biological drive, not something we outgrow, but something that gets suppressed. He looked at the life histories of murderers, of Nobel laureates, of NASA engineers, and one of the patterns that showed up in the healthiest, most creative, most resilient people across all those groups was a rich history of purposeless, self-directed play. Sorry, that's a hard word to say. Basically not having purpose. Purposeless, self-directed play. And one of the things that showed up in the most troubled lives or troubled people is a childhood that was stripped of that joy of self-directed play, of the purposelessness of it all. Brown defines play not by what you do, but how it feels, and that it's basically done for its own sake, that time seems to disappear, that there's no goal that matters more than that thing itself. And that, I think, is a really good description of how I experience vanilla, right? I like shaking the beans. There's really nothing more that brings me joy in this moment right now is when I get a new batch of beans and I go to my kitchen table and I put on my headset and listen to music and I just cut my beans and put them into vodka bottles. That brings me a lot of joy, and I can genuinely just kind of tune out and just enjoy that moment. Along those lines, there's this Japanese concept I keep coming back to called ma. It's usually translated as negative space, which is the pause, the gap, the emptiness that gives shape to everything around it. So in music, it's like the silence between notes. In architecture, it's the empty room that kind of lets the occupied rooms around it breathe. The Japanese don't treat this as an absence, they treat it as a presence, that the space itself has meaning. And I think that this purposeless play might be our ma, the gap that we've been taught to fill, that if we have space and time in our day, we need to fill it with things like productivity, with purpose, with justification, with something that brings us money. We need to hustle. We need to, prep something for the next day. But actually that needs to stay empty in order to do its work. That time, that gap needs to stay empty. There's a poet called Mary Oliver. When I was kind of researching this concept, she writes a poem called The Summer Day, and in it she asks, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the question is real, basically is, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And most people, I think, read that as like a productivity challenge. But if you read the whole poem, you'll realize that she spent the entire day watching a grasshopper eat sugar out of her palm. And the question that she asks comes after idleness. The idleness really was the point. I want to say something about kids here because I think we misread them a little bit. We worry that our kids aren't doing enough or that we're not doing enough for them. We sign them up for things. We ask, what did you learn today? Before we ask, what did you do today just because you wanted to? We reward finished products, the painting that gets hung up, or the project that gets graded, or the practice that turns into a performance, right? And our kids learn early that doing things for no reason is a little suspicious. Doing things just because they're interesting or absorbing or pleasant, that's fine for a few minutes, but if you're doing it for too long, someone will ask if you finished your work. And I don't know all the details that go into this or all the psychological aspects of it, but I think kids need to see us play and not just perform enjoyment, but actually play and get into it and lose touch with ourselves. To do something pointless and absorbing and slow. And they need evidence that grown-ups still do that it's still allowed, and that it doesn't have to produce anything. In fact, one thing that I've noticed that my teenager says is he'll kind of get serious about something and be like, well, I'm getting to be an adult now. I'm too old to enjoy that. And it kind of makes me sad because I feel like I've taught him that adults are too serious or they're too task-driven. And really, I want to teach him that adults can play too. My kid asking, can't we just buy vanilla extract, was in some way about what counts as worth doing. And I want him to have a bigger answer than I had, which is essentially nothing. Like I'm a little dumbfounded just because I enjoy it, I guess. But that wasn't even the first answer that I had. Now, if you're looking for a way to kind of dive into conversation with your kids, here are a few questions that might open something up at your house. So pick one and see where it goes. For your younger kids, you could ask, when was the last time you did something just because it was fun? Not to win, not to get better at it, just because it felt good. What was it? Or 2, is there something you'd like to try that you don't have a reason for? What would you like to make or do if nobody was grading it? For your older kids, maybe you could ask, do you think there's a difference between being lazy and doing something purposelessness? Doing purposeless and doing something purposeless. What's the difference? Maybe you don't use that phrasing because apparently I can't say the word. Another question that you could ask is, what's something you used to do just for fun that started to feel like work? What happened? And maybe that's a good question to ask yourself. In fact, for yourself, maybe you could ask yourself, what do you do just for yourself? Not to be productive, not to help anyone, just because you like it. And if you can't think of one, say that. That can be the conversation. That was me when last year I realized, I don't really have a hobby. I everything I do is task driven, and I wanted to find a hobby, which is where vanilla extract came in, because I felt like that seems like something I would enjoy. In fact, I tried several hobbies leading up to that before I kind of landed on that one for now. And then something else you could ask anyone in your family, really, if you had a whole afternoon with no plans, no screens, no obligations, what would you actually want to do? Not what should you want to do. That's what I would immediately want to say, like, oh, I want to get everything off my checklist. But what would you actually want to do? And then as we move into our do piece, okay, right? Because this is learn, talk, do. So we've kind of learned about a concept, given some conversation starters. We move into practicing that. This week, I recommend you try what I'm calling an intentional hobby tour. And I want to be specific about what I mean by that. I did this last year when I myself was looking for a hobby because I realized I didn't have one. Set aside some time this week, an hour or even 30 minutes, for something with no point. Don't try to find a hobby that produces income. Maybe it doesn't have to be a skill that you're building for a goal. It doesn't have to be some kind of creative project with a deadline. Just choose something because it interests you, or used to interest you, or might interest you, or you've been curious about it. For me, I tried painting. I tried house DIY type things. I tried a few different things before I kind of landed on extract for now. But it could be whittling a stick. It could be drawing something. It could be learning a couple of chords, or pressing flowers, or making bread just to make it, not to impress anyone. For your kids, it could be giving them that same freedom to do unstructured time with no assignment attached. Tell them you're doing it too. That's the important part. And then once you take that time and you take it yourself and they take it, at the end of that time, ask each other, did you enjoy it? Did you feel guilty? Did one of these feel stronger than the other? For younger kids, this might look like a few minutes, 15, 20 minutes of playing with anything they want with no screen and no suggestion from you. And for older kids, you might have to fight them on the screens, but do it anyway because it's worthwhile for you and your kids to find things that you enjoy just because you enjoy it. Clearly, I have a lot of things to learn about this. I am still genuinely fighting the impulse to justify my interest in vanilla extract. But I think that's actually the work, noticing the impulse and doing the thing anyway. Paying attention to what matters, even when it doesn't produce anything, is its own kind of mattering. If this was something that was interesting to you, you can find our full show notes, sources, and the activities that we talked about today, as well as a little printable family conversation guide on learntalkdo.substack.com. I'm Heidi. This is Learn Talk Do. Go shake a jar of something.